Hello and welcome to episode 95 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Joe Meade is with me too. And Joe, we've got a lot of Big Ten storylines to get to. Between transfer portal, we've got a new coach. First off, though, it is the Final Four, and no Big Ten teams made it. Not entirely surprising. We had all one seeds make it. But Joe, as the Big Ten ends their NCAA tournament, how would you characterize the conference's performance in the Big Dance?
Overall, I'd probably give it a B. Like nothing that was crazy good, but nothing. I thought it mainly met expectation, to be honest with you, considering the seeds. I thought, for the most part, the higher seeds, so I'd call it seeds, 1 to 5, did their job. When you look at Michigan, Maryland, they all bowed out to one seeds, and then obviously coming to a head with Michigan State. I do think it was one Maryland loss to Colorado State away, or a potential disaster in the first round from Purdue to being far worse. But I think overall the Big Ten met expectations. To be honest with you, every game the Big Ten lost or got eliminated in was not really that surprising. Let's just face it. Maybe the actual in-game play was, i.e., the Purdue game, i.e., Michigan blowing a 9-point lead that quickly. But in terms of the actual results, nothing too surprising.
Yeah, we had one Big Ten team lose to a team that they had a higher seed than. That was Wisconsin. And then the same one way the opposite for Michigan over Texas A&M. So I think the conference did well enough across the board, obviously winning in the first round each time. And then we had just no teams in the Final Four. Would have been nice to get one there, but I do think the conference did have a decent account of themselves in the tournament. And as the committee has proven, that does matter in the future. So definitely won't. Big Ten definitely won't be punished for this like another conference might. But Joe, we've got some headlines from some teams that finished the season a little bit ago, and let's start with Illinois. Brad Underwood basically had to turn over the entire roster coming into this year, and it looks like he might have to do it again for the most part. We have Yakishonis expected to go to the draft at this point, and then we had a couple of transfer portal. Kerry Booth, for example, was pretty expected, but Trey White and Merez Johnson both going into the portal too. Joe, perhaps a little bit unexpected to us, those not really locked in with every Illinois insider, but Brad Underwood's going to have a lot of new faces again next year.
Yeah, Sean, in a way, it's kind of a shame because I thought they kind of clicked together toward the end of the regular season. I know, people are going to highlight the Maryland destruction in the Big Ten tournament, but for the most part, they dominated Michigan and Chrysler. They beat a pretty good Purdue team, and overall we're rebounding better, shooting better. But I think kind of that second half of the Illinois game, and then you know, I think this offseason was always going to be a lot murkier for the Illini, considering three of their best freshmen, especially the number one Yakishonis, was going to leave. But to have it kind of come down this quickly, I'm not saying it's time to hit the panic button, but you're certainly on the bad side of what could become pretty good later on. And that's not necessarily a great spot for Illinois, because I thought, frankly, this year overall ruined a lot of momentum they've had as a program over the last, from really 2021 to 2024. And I think this year overall fell flat, and we'll get into expectations later. But I think to be sitting where we are on what's going to be April 2nd tomorrow, Illinois is definitely taking a step back as a program. Not a huge one, not time for panic, but it's a step back objectively.
Yeah, there's two more players that have eligibility left that we didn't mention. Thomas Lavavisic is one of them. We do expect him to go back to Illinois next year, perhaps joined by his brother, maybe not. And the real question mark for me, Joe, as we try and navigate these next 2 weeks, and Illinois fans try and see what next season's going to look like, is Will Riley. He could probably go to the NBA draft if he wanted to and get drafted, but, a lot of players of his caliber are choosing to come back to school. So obviously not a guess, but he is really the main question mark for me before Illinois start to add to the roster.
Yeah. Where do you think you'd put those chances right now, Sean, if you had to?
Lower than before. When he was had a couple 30-point games there early on, it was kind of implied that he'd be a one and done, but I would have to lean closer to him coming back to school than not. And if he were to enter the draft and then also the portal at the same time, you'd think that decision would have already been made as roster spots are starting to disappear at some other places. So if I had to guess right now, and I don't really know anything else than that, I do think he'll be at Illinois next year.
All right.
But all right, well, one of those players from Illinois, Joe, that transferred, Merez Johnson Jr., is going to be going up to Ann Arbor next year. He committed to Dusty May and the Wolverines today. Him going into the portal seemed like something that kind of came together late in the year. Perhaps a late disagreement between him, his parents, and Underwood about him being the 5, rumors are, and he wouldn't have with Ivisic back. But Dusty acts pretty quickly. Merez was in the portal for a couple days, and being that it is something that did kind of come together last minute, Michigan probably got in there first and made a good enough pitch to Merez, and he's a Wolverine.
Yeah, Sean, I think this was really surprising, not because of the result, but because of how fast it happened. I was particularly surprised because I think it's kind of implied, Vlad Golden's out of eligibility, Reuben Jones, and all signs as of now point to Danny Wolf staying in the NBA draft. Whether he declares full on, I doubt, but I think he will eventually end up being drafted this year. So that kind of leaves Michigan scrambling for bigs. I don't think Morez, a negative off the top, solves their problem at the 5. I think they might need 2 more bigs after this commitment, but it does solve a rebounding problem. Danny Wolf, for as bad as he was on turnovers, was really good at rebounding. Vlad Golden, in the last 5 minutes of game, got his rebounds. And another guard who announced that he was going to leave Michigan today, Trey Donaldson, was pretty good at getting rebounds too. So I think Merez filled that void. I'm not in love with the fact that he doesn't shoot the 3 at all. His free throw percentage certainly leaves a lot to be desired, but I think in terms of rebounding, physicality, and the fact he was only a freshman, a lot to look at there. And really, the main shocking thing is this kid was committed to Illinois since his sophomore year of high school from Chicago. Somewhat surprising that it came to this that quickly.
And there are a couple in the guard department for Michigan, Joe, that we could go into. Trey Donaldson enters the portal somewhat unexpected, I think, from what you've told me and what I've seen elsewhere. That leaves a couple other players with eligibility left for Michigan. Roddy Gale's one of them. Expect him to go into the portal too. So while they're losing some guards, they did pick one up from North Carolina. Elliot Cadeau transfers from the Tar Heels to the Wolverines. And Joe, as much as he does have his limitations, he is a pretty good creator. He'll have a ton of assists, and if he can sort of be relied on in that sense only, I think he could be a pretty solid player for Michigan.
Yeah, I think catch and shoot, there's some potential from 3. I think he was about high 30s, low 40% from there.
He was
certainly
very good down the stretch.
Yeah, certainly, you look at the Duke game where he scored 15, was 3 of 3 from 3. That's probably more of an anomaly than the norm. If he improves his shot, a lot of people criticize Caleb Love, going to Arizona, but overall he did improve with, I think, better coaching and Tommy Lloyd as opposed to Hubert Davis and a better system. Maybe we see that with Cadeau. I'm not a huge believer that Roddy Gale will enter the portal. I think your more likely scenario right now, Michigan's guards with eligibility are, obviously Cadeau, Roddy Gale, Kaysen, and Namari Burnett. I think it's more likely Namari Burnett either moves on to the NBA or, whatever equivalent pro league, or enters the portal, because they do have Trey McKinney and Grady Winters coming in, 2 guys that might take up time in those guard spots. But we did see at FAU, Sean, Dusty did like that 3-guard system. So maybe it's not as packed of a room as we think. And, perhaps they're looking for one more piece there, even if everyone is staying.
And there's a couple other targets that they're going after. It looks like Guath from San Diego State's going to go to Kentucky. at this point. Michigan was heavily involved there, but what are some other targets that the Wolverines are going at this point?
Yeah, Sean. It seems like Michigan was linked to Yaxel, Portland transfer Austin Rapp, and Yaxel Lendenborg, two mid-major guys. Yaxel Lendenborg, obviously a prolific scorer. Don't love the fact that he's not a heavy volume three-point shooter. Certainly could score. Austin Rapp is the exact opposite. Didn't necessarily light it up scoring, but was a high volume three-point shooter, 6'10", both guys 6'10". So I do like that. It would be interesting to see those guys commit with Morez Johnson Jr. because I don't think you could have all those guys starting together or on the court for extended periods of time. I still think Michigan really needs a true five, a true center, because I don't think Morez or either of those two guys would solve the void. The Malik Renew stuff is completely false. I do
Yeah,
not believe
Renew
he's even
is
looked at Michigan.
Renew is Michigan is in his top five, but it's between USC and Miami right now for Renew. By the looks of it, Auburn and Arkansas were also on that list. I think it's between USC and Miami. I would give the Canes the favorite right now. Um, but Joe Lendenborg is probably going to be the highest paid transfer in the portal this year. He might come just short of Donovan Dent, but he's up there. So if Michigan wants him, they're going to have to empty a lot of the tank. I would guess he probably ends up at a Kentucky or Memphis maybe, or he might just go to the NBA draft. He is good enough to do that too from UAB. So Michigan's on a ton of these lists, which to me means Dusty wants a lot of chances at these guys, and there are scholarships to fill everywhere, but Michigan is just got to fill out every team has to fill out their roster, and I think we're a long way away from that. All right, up next, Joe, we've got Oscar Clough, the center from South Dakota State and Australia. He commits to Purdue. Matt Painter, after not using the portal for 2 full years, goes to it here, and he gets one of the best bigs in the portal in Clough. And they did lose Daniel Jacobson 1 game into the year. He was their freshman who was supposed to be a part of the year. He broke his leg. He is not in the portal yet. He's expected to be a part next year. But, Joe, we saw Kaufman run at the 5 was really tough on their defense, and perhaps moving TKR back to the 4 gives Purdue a chance to get back in it.
Yeah, I think a lot of what happens here, Sean, is a wait and see game with Purdue because right now it seems really good. You add Clough, you keep TKR, you keep Braden Smith supposedly. That is a phenomenal big three right away. No matter what happens in the transfer portal in the Big Ten, I find it hard to believe any big three will top that. I think that is such a lethal trio. It's kind of scary. And I think, the field of 68 hyped up that Purdue could be the number 1 or a top 3 preseason team in the country next year. I'm not inclined to go there quite yet.
I think they need one more top transfer to round out their
Yeah.
starting lineup.
Yeah, but in terms of early Big Ten favorite, I think it certainly could be the case,
And I think
especially with what the other favorites for next year,
and
supposed favorites lost.
And Colvin is transferring out. Berg, Waddell, a couple of other non-scholarship players that didn't have that big of a role. Heidi is up in the air right now, apparently. Maybe, maybe not. But, if that 5th starter can be somebody good for Purdue, I think that's where they can. I think they probably are already better than this year right now with Jacobson and Clough coming in. I think they have a couple other recruits, but nobody else other than Colvin that played a significant role is in the portal. So Purdue is doesn't seem like they're neglecting the portal this year, and I don't think they're done, Joe. They do have their names on a ton of other lists too. So I think Painter is, realizing that next year is probably the closing of this window for them with Braden and TKR. So I think he's going to use every penny that he can to get this team into a better spot. And now they still made the second weekend, and they're still a double bye team in the Big Ten tournament, but there were some serious flaws there this year that seemed pretty avoidable in the age of the transfer portal, and it looks like Painter is learning from that mistake.
I agree, Sean, and I do believe they bring back Fletcher Lawyer as well.
Yep.
Another key piece, and I thought that could be a potential portal portal addition for another Big Ten program. I always had a theory that he would come back home to a Michigan or Michigan State, but as of right now, holding firm there. And even those four shot, I think that is a really good starting. That's a really good starting point for a team.
All right, Joe. Well, we've got a couple other teams in the portal. My Indiana Hoosiers, they're closing in on a couple names. Nobody committed yet, not even Tucker DeVries, but he was, he's been taking all these players out on visits wearing Indiana stuff. He's got to get that waiver accepted first. He's under the game limit. Fully expect that to happen. Indiana is closing in on Connor Enright from DePaul. Fully expect that to happen maybe before this even goes out tonight. He was on a visit today, and Connor Enright from DePaul, likely a Hoosier. And then a couple other names they're close on, Josh Dix from Iowa and Ryan Conwell from Xavier. I would give them, Indiana, both the leaders for them, but with Texas and Conwell's former coach and their apparent NIL war chest, Conwell might be a little bit closer to a coin toss. But what are your thoughts on what looks like DeVries' early strategy here for the Hoosiers?
I think it's really scoring heavy, obviously, with his son Tucker. I don't know too much about Enright. I've seen he's gotten progressively better over the years. I think probably more of a role player than anything. I don't
He
think
was at
that's
Drake with DeVries before he went to DePaul this year, where he was 8.5 points a game before getting injured.
Yeah. I do think Dix is probably obviously everyone's going to highlight Conwell. I do think Dix would be a really good addition because of his success in the league. Hopefully he'd be the equivalent of, what some of these other Big Ten vets have been. Ronnie Yale at Michigan, even though he didn't pop off till the end, knew the league very well and certainly thrived against teams he did at Ohio State, also at Michigan. So perhaps Dix does that. I do think Conwell is probably the most notable player that we brought up aside from a DeVries. Whether he comes or not, I think Indiana's got to close that sooner than later because I don't think you want Texas entering the fray. And then you always have the issue of does a Kentucky enter? Does a Louisville? And, this is the kind of game we play now. Michigan, for example, was leading with Magoo Guath over the weekend. Kentucky might have benefited from the fact they ended their season 2 hours before Michigan. Who really knows, right? And that's the world we live in now. So I think Indiana, my message would probably be, Sean, and I think you'd agree, is close those sooner than later.
And this seems to be the plan to me as somebody who's just getting every information I can. And there's a couple things that I can get earlier than other people, but not that much earlier. I mean, I told you, Joe, about the coach 2 hours before it happened. So it's not like I'm predicting anything that's going to happen a couple of days in advance. But it seems to me that everybody that DeVries wants is a guard. Now, that you could take that either way. Maybe he just wants to shore up the guards first. That's been a problem for the Hoosiers in the past. Or that there might be a forward that doesn't have to be recruited very hard to come. And there's really only been two forwards that the Hoosiers have been linked to, and one of them's a link into the next team that we're talking about, so I'm going to go back to the guards for a second. But this was kind of initially the news, or the thought from most Indiana fans. If DeVries can be the definite second option, or maybe even third, and Enright can come off the bench, I think that team could be really good. Conwell, Dix, and DeVries, I think that team could be really good as a big three. I mean, they can score it. Conwell can guard. DeVries looks like Darren wants to play him at the 4, which is good too, but I think that is the path that he's taking right now. Big three, which includes Tucker and 2 guards, and then Enright off the bench.
Absolutely, Sean. And, I think probably very early on, I think a lot of people have accused DeVries. I mean, really any coach in this conference, from DeVries to Medved to what'll probably be a Buzz Williams later on, who we will discuss. They're going to be accused a lot of early on already going for plan Bs. I don't think that's necessarily plan Bs. I think there's so many damn players in the portal. You have to take a pass on everyone.
And the 2 forwards, Joe, that Indiana is interested in. First one is Flory Badunga from Kansas, the 5-star recruit, McDonald's All-American. Kind of got stuck behind Hunter this year, and I thought he did pretty well and was kind of going to be the heir apparent there. Obviously, things happen. He's in the portal. Some people are saying Michigan is involved. Some people are saying Indiana is involved. But everybody is saying that Auburn's involved. So unless something changes with one of our two teams, I do think he's going to be a part of War Eagle.
Yeah, I don't think Michigan had much of a chance. I think they had a slight fade of hope for a few hours on Sunday, but that's since passed. I'd be shocked if he ends up in this conference shot or even north of the Mason-Dixon.
All right. Well, the other forward that Indiana has been listed to, Joe, is a former or Big Ten forward, and they had a couple of names enter the transfer portal today. Some expected, this one expected, but one that was not expected. Xavier Booker was one of the ones that was expected from Michigan State. He was pretty close to going to Indiana out of high school, Final Two or Final Three. And this being sort of the only forward that Indiana's on a list for, it looks like Darren DeVries might want to see if Booker can be a piece. But not entirely surprised to see Indiana interested with his connection, but I think it's very much expected from everybody that he entered the portal. But where do you think Xavier Booker might go?
I think probably Indiana's a really safe option. Purdue's the other hometown team, but I doubt with the TKR probably returning and then the new additions that they really are going to be desperate for him, especially because he's not going to have much of a role on that team. It'd be pretty similar to what his ceiling this year at State was, which was a guy who might have gotten extended minutes off the bench. Perhaps he looks at a Big East school, a Butler or a perhaps a Xavier, but I really think Indiana's probably got a heavy chance here. And perhaps they sell him into the role that you're probably going to start, but you have to earn it. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be something he backs away from. People forget Xavier Booker was the number 10 or 11 player in last year's recruiting class. So certainly a guy with a lot of upside. I think Michigan State fans will tell you he needs a lot of work on his defense. I think his 3-point shot is there. I think maybe even needs to get a little tougher, perhaps. I don't know how you solve that issue, but I think should DeVries be that good at player development, which I'm led to believe he is, taking a Xavier Booker and elevating his game would be a very high upside for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, with Tucker at the 4 and Booker at the 5, that is a really light defense in the front court. And I just don't know if Darren will offer him a starting spot. And while he probably will be there in the dollars column, I think it would be irresponsible for him to offer him like the definite starting 5 spot. So I don't know if he comes and wants to be off the bench and earn a spot, great. But I think that's why others might be leading there. All right, Joe, to Michigan State again. One of their guards entered the transfer portal with a year of eligibility left, not exactly expected. Junior Trey Holloman enters the portal, and after what was a pretty good season for him, ends off in tough fashion with an 0 of 10 shooting game. But Joe, this one, by even the most locked-in Michigan State people, didn't seem to come. But what's up with Holloman here?
I was pretty shell shocked. I was at work today and I worked with a lot of Spartans, and that news took them by surprise. And we are shooting on April Fool's Day. Thought that was up there with the fake Tom Izzo retirement post that I see every year. I really thought it was fake. But Trey Holloman, a lot of people are going to highlight the 0 of 11 in the last game. Ultimately, there were games, especially against Michigan, where he completely went off, had 21 points or 18 points. When he shoots well from three, I think this guy has a really high ceiling. The bottom line is, Sean, he's if Michigan State wants to elevate their program to get back to the Final Four, and I know they were close this year, Trey Holloman was probably not going to be the starting 2 or 3 on that team. Now, that's not to rip Trey Holloman. That's not to rip MSU. I just don't think for what their expectations going to be next year that that's a fit. Now, what people are going to speculate is, does this mean Jace Richardson back? Does this mean we're getting another guy? I think it's way too early to tell on both issues. One thing I will say, I'm seeing Jace Richardson projected anywhere from like 10 to 15 in the draft. I don't know whether he turns that down. I think MSU will certainly put their best foot forward with NIL, but I'm going to assume Jace does not come back.
Yeah, that's the Michigan State side of this is, he's a senior. He probably wants to start. Izzo probably doesn't want him to start, if I had to guess, or maybe be the fifth option. So there is part of this that Holloman, was not guaranteed a starting spot and wanted to get it. I think his game, the best version of him, probably does come with Tom Izzo at Michigan State. And there are some rumors that he was tampered with and he's just going to get the biggest paycheck for his senior year before he goes to play professional in a country that doesn't pay all that great. But, certainly kind of everything is on the table. Everything's on the table when it comes to Trey Holloman here. It's possible, Izzo said, if you don't want to start, you should probably go somewhere else. It's possible Holloman said, I want to start. I definitely want to start. I want more money. I'm going to go somewhere else. I really can't. Nothing has kind of come out since it happened, and we don't even know who would be interested in him or where he would go or what kind of NIL figure he would demand. But certainly caught, I think, pretty much everybody off guard.
Yeah, some early rumors I've heard, and I don't know if they have much credibility. Arizona State's tied in, Bobby Hurley. Texas Tech's another one. It's funny, Mike Kumar, who you should listen to our Sunday cast if you haven't. He was saying, the West Texas buddy, we've seen that in the past. I think it's probably been more prominent based on, I think ever since the Chris Beard departure from there, I think they've really stepped up their NIL packages, especially with some of their prominent alums like Patrick Mahomes, for example, doing well. So I think that's certainly a very heavy possibility. I'll be honest with you, Sean, because I do agree that I think Trey knows deep down being an MSU legend his senior year and probably averaging maybe 24 to 25 minutes a game was probably the best role for him. But the guy moves on. One possible interconference angle. He is from Minnesota. I don't know whether Medved goes after him, but that's way too early to even put it out to the universe. So I'll stop right there.
And Medved, Joe, is obviously just getting started there. There are a couple Colorado State players that entered. I'd expect him to bring them over. So a couple starters there, just get them started. And then really the thing that we're going to end up with today, unless any transfer moves has broke since we started, and I'll try and check there while we talk about this, but Maryland has a vacancy for all of a day and a half. Buzz Williams, the former Texas A&M, Marquette, Virginia Tech coach, is headed to College Park. He was certainly like the big name that was still available this coaching cycle, and a couple of the closer mid-major options, Tony Skinn and Dwayne Simpkins, got pretty big extensions with, kind of big buyouts for somebody of their caliber. So the interim AD for Maryland pulls the trigger rather quickly, and they do kind of know exactly what they're going to get here with Buzz Williams.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised at the swift nature of this. However, I think I should have known that this was more of inevitable, not necessarily Buzz, but the quick hire, because I think
they got to get going
Maryland,
now.
Well, no, I think most Maryland people knew Willard was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, their Sweet 16 game was last Thursday. They probably knew he was gone, though, one day before that, and they already put feelers out there with a search committee. So Buzz Williams, I am really interested to understand what's going on in the Texas A&M athletic department. They had the baseball coach leave for Texas the day after the World Series. They've had Buzz Williams leave, and one thing I know about Texas A&M, I know Mike says Texas Tech has a lot of money. Aside from Texas, I think Texas A&M has the second deepest pockets in that state, and that with the Aggie network and whatnot, that is really interesting that happened. But that's more of a greater college basketball issue. Going into Buzz though, Sean, I think I don't know how much I love this hire, to be honest. I don't doubt he will bring Maryland consistently to the NCAA tournament. Can he keep that talent there? I thought Kevin Willard and even Mark Turgeon, to a large degree, did a really good job keeping guys home. And, with Derek Queen for Kevin Willard, Mark Turgeon, so many to name, and even attracting five stars from other states. Can Maryland continue to bring in that elite talent? I think that's going to be my biggest question for Buzz. I think he can develop. I think he's a phenomenal in-game coach. I think he's a program builder. But for Maryland let's face it, Sean, this is a program that they've been to the second weekend before. Can they get past that threshold? Can they be a true Final Four contender? Because I don't think they've been that for quite a while.
And with Buzz Williams, he's He was the coach at Marquette from 2008 to 2014. They were 139 and 69. That's 66% win, 64% in the Big East. Five NCAA tournaments, three second weekends, one Elite Eight. So pretty good there. Then he moved on to Virginia Tech, where after a tough first season, he had 20 wins 4 years in a row. Three of them were NCAA tournament years. One Sweet 16, 59% win percentage, and just under 500 in the ACC. And then that is mostly dragged down by a 2-16 first year. He was 10-8 three times in a row, and then 12-6 to finish. And then at Texas A&M, a tough first 2 years. They were 8-10 in the COVID year. But since then, Joe, they've had 4 20-win seasons, three NCAA tournament appearances. 1 year where they went to the NIT, they nearly backdoored themselves into the tournament, but round of 64, round of 32, round of 32. So it kind of, three very different jobs in a row. Buzz Williams has had pretty similar results, and in a Maryland team that is kind of reportedly in the middle of the pack NIL wise, I think they're a pretty good bet to make the tournament. 4 out of the next 5 years, one Sweet 16 maybe. And I don't know how much of a downgrade, if at all, he is over Willard. And when your coach gets hired away from you this late in the cycle, to get somebody of similar caliber, I do think should be chalked up as a win.
Yeah, and Buzz is not an old guy either. He's 52 years old. Supposedly, this should be his last job, I would hope, unless someone really big comes calling. But uh, how he did in Virginia Tech, I think it'll probably be similar, aside from the rough first year, especially with the portal now. And I think Maryland has a lot more of a basketball school than Virginia Tech. I think with the proper backing, Maryland should be back in the tournament next year. I think that should be a fair expectation, no matter what happens for Buzz. And I think from there is really, really where you're gonna judge if he earned his paycheck or not.
And he is somebody who has taken a little bit to get going at these schools. I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually not that good next year and are a 8-12 team in NIT or that caliber of team. It's tough for him to get going this late in the portal. Rodney Rice from Maryland and Jacoby Gillespie are in the portal. Gillespie looks awfully likely to Tennessee right now. And while Rice did enter, Joe, and he got a ton of interest, he did really say in his statement that he wanted to consider Maryland. So I think if Buzz wants Rice back, I think he can get him. And then in terms of bringing players over from A&M, not sure. Wade Taylor's out of eligibility. I know that. Pharrell Payne is there, former Minnesota player. So maybe he can get started with Rice, a couple of his A&M players, and go from there. But I do think Buzz's worst year at Maryland will be next year.
I do agree, Sean. And, I think for as many Dusty Mays as there are and, Pat Kelsey's, there's a fair amount of coaches who take a little while to get going. I just hope for his sake it's not too long because Maryland fans, I'm not saying they're impatient, but they're not necessarily the year 3 we better be making the tournament. I think year 2 you better be making the tournament.
Yep, and he's not much of a risk. I think we know what we're going to get with him. He's going to be, 6th to 8th in the Big Ten most years and have a 7 or 8 seed. And if he gets, a good group of players, maybe develops a couple, maybe they crack out a Sweet 16. But national championship, crazier things have happened. I wouldn't say yes to that. But had they hired somebody else, Joe, with a bigger risk, there's a chance that it couldn't have turned out. So I understand why Maryland acted swiftly here. Had this gone another week or so, it would have been unfair to really give a coach 0 players on April 10th and say, all right, get us into the tournament next year. Now I think there's a legit chance that he can put together a competitive roster, and 2-3 years from now, I think he'll have this thing rolling where they're a legit top 25 team and are maybe not the most fun to watch as the neutral with their sort of physical, throw the ball up the rim, get the rebound type play, but that style should fit in the conference. From what they're not a visually appeasing offensive team, but they are hard to beat. They're really physical, and that kind of does play in this conference.
Yeah, and Q for Texas A&M, Q the always the whenever there's a job in the South that's open, that's presumably bigger than Ole Miss. Q the Chris Beard rumors, Q all the crazy rumors that's going to happen because the most fascinating thing, Sean, is this going to be the new carousel game because we had I'm going to call it just what it is. I think it's musical chairs. You had Nova Fire, Willard there, Buzz from A&M to Maryland. Is A&M gonna poach another like power conference coach, and then that's gonna come open? I think that's pretty interesting, especially because you know April 2nd versus just last week. There's a ginormous difference going on right now.
And I think in the age of the portal and NIL, Joe, we are seeing a lot more of maybe like lateral moves isn't right, but very slight step ups. Or, I don't think we see the West Virginia coach take the Indiana job. I don't think we see the Texas A&M coach take the Maryland job in before these times. But um, Texas A&M thinks that they're getting like Nate Oates. It's not happening. He's waiting for Kansas. It'll be interesting to see who they get because inevitably that will start another carousel. They do have enough to probably get a power conference coach. So we'll see what they do next year. Obviously, they're not in the Big Ten, so we're not going to linger on that for too long. But, Joe, we got to a lot today, kept it to a pretty short time. We're going to try and do one nutshell a week, basketball related. As we get through transfer portal season here, obviously, if enough happens, we'll get back to it. But we're also going to be starting our season recap episodes where we'll sort of grade these teams this year. Maybe a little bit of an outlook towards the future, but really that'll focus on this season. And then we're going to finish up our football ones, and then that'll probably take us into June, and then maybe a short break before football previews in August. So that is our plan for the off season. We are going to keep doing podcasts, a lot of transfer posts, so please like those, please subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.